Is the first part, or really just a generalized overview of what I expect you to do for your rhetorical analysis and the layout and how I expect you to construct it. So this is just a brief overview, or our part one. So to recap or overview, remember that composing is the process of creating your project. Rhetoric is how you communicate your values or the strategies that you use. Discourse is what conversation you start or issue you introduce coming from your project. So again, remember, discourse is synonymous to conversation. What conversation are you starting? And project or document is your mode of communication. It is the way that you will communicate that discourse. It is the way that you will start that conversation. And then, of course, what you use in order to start that conversation will be rhetoric, and how you, what you decide to include, what strategies you use, what you decide to prioritize, what you decide not to include is part of the composing process of you creating your project. So these terms are all interconnected. Some of the logistics for your rhetorical analysis. So let's make sure that it is in MLA 8th edition format. You can visit Purdue OWL for the specifics there. So just some basics: 12-point font, double spaced. Make sure you have a works cited page. I do not believe you will need secondary sources. The only sources that I see you using are the ones from this class, so any readings I've given, as well as anything you receive from your community partner. And let's keep it to 3 to 4 pages, no more, no less. All right, so there will be 6 parts to your analysis. The first part is the introduction, or where you will actually introduce the rhetorical situation. So this introduction should be an overview of the list below, considering your project from the community partners. So what is the rhetorical situation from the project? How would you overview the rhetorical situation based on who you are, which is the rhetor, the exigence, which is the goals of the project, the audience, which is who you're addressing, and the constraints, which is the types of limitations that you believe you may be running into or will run into while you are completing your project or once it is finished. So the introduction, the rhetorical situation: why was the project created? Who was it created for? To meet what need? For whom? What problem are you looking to begin discussing through your project? Remember, you're not really looking to solve a problem. You think of it more as you're looking to begin a discussion about a problem. What conversation or discourse do you want to start with your project? What conversation will you start with your project? So there's a difference there. What do you want to do, and what will you do? And that's thinking about, of course, realistically, what can and cannot be done. What do you have in control, and what is out of your control? And how do the constituents, exigence, audience, constraints, and rhetor construct the entire rhetorical situation? How do these constituents, when you think of them together, and as a unit, how does it construct the project? How does it construct the problem the project presents that it seeks to begin a conversation about? All right, so thinking about yourself as a rhetor, I want to, you probably start off with your main identity or persona you exemplified in your resume or cover letter assignment. Think about that identity, what you prioritize, what you kind of left on the back end. Are you going to keep that same identity, or do you plan to change it? Why or why not? Who are you to this project? What are your interests? What identity are you writing with as? What type of composing does this encompass? Is there a certain type of language practice that you have to do? Is there a certain type of vernacular that you have to write with? Who is your, who are you writing to? And so that is going to determine a lot of what type of persona you're going to develop. If you're writing to second graders, that's going to determine a lot of your identity and how you write. How does your audience influence the identity you choose to write as, the community goals, priorities? What is your relationship to the project? How are you able to make a connection between yourself and the project? How are you building that bridge? What is your relationship to the community partner? What is your relationship to the people who the community partner serves? What about the Boston area as a whole? Remember, these are Boston partners. So what is your relationship to the Boston area as a whole through your networking with these partners and the people they serve, and finally the larger Boston area? What is your stake in this project? Why does it matter that your project succeeds in its exigence, which we will talk about next? Are you writing as yourself, or are you writing as part of the larger organization? Are you writing as a friend? Are you writing as a worker? Are you writing as an expert? These are all things to consider when you start writing out your rhetor part of your assignment. When you think about exigence, what is the discourse about, or what is the conversation about? What are the fundamental values, underlining values? What's at stake and for whom? Why is the discourse needed? Why is now the right time to make this project start this conversation? Why does this discourse or project matter? Are you responding to something that happened or something that may or will happen in the future? What is the discourse or project trying to accomplish? What are the goals of the discourse or project? How is the audience supposed to react? Right? So that last part, how is the audience supposed to react? That's going to depend a lot on what is the purpose of your project. Okay, so let's consider audience here. Who is the primary audience? Who is the audience addressed, or the actual audience? Who is the secondary audience? Who is the audience invoked? What are those abstract audiences that you have or that you construct? How does your discourse define or create context for your readers? What type of audience are you attracting or creating based on the content/discourse of your project? What do you want your readers or audience to ultimately do based on the exigence of your project? How does your audience influence you as a rhetor? Again, these are all questions that mesh over, that overlap. So if you see questions that you feel like could be answered in one part, in another part, that's going to be you as the writer to determine whether or not you want it to work in one section or the other section. It does not matter to me. What type of exigences, roles, constraints may your targeted audience, your audience addressed, bring? So your actual audience, what types of different experiences, exigence, roles, what are their motives? What are they bringing? How do you plan to compensate or take these into consideration for your project? Or it's always important as the writer, as the rhetor, as the composer to always think about your audience and who they are. So how are you going to take these into consideration? Constraints. What are the constraints or limitations of your purpose, discourse, or project? And these all are different. Your purpose, your discourse, your project. What are the constraints or limitations of those? It could be the template or design, the document, the exigence itself, your audience, who you're addressing, the timeline that you have to work on. What causes any limitations that you may have to realistically do with the project you're given? How is your identity a constraint? So this is actually something that we did discuss in the Grant Davy piece. How is your identity a constraint? How is the situation a constraint? What does the rhetorical situation not address? So there can be several conversations that the community partner wants to introduce, or has other conversations that they would like to incorporate. But what does your project specifically focus on, and what will it not address? How are the resources available to you act as a constraint? How is maybe your limitations to access of people, to access of materials, to access of community partners, the different modes of communication? How is just meeting on Zoom or meeting via email a constraint, if you even see it as one? How is it a constraint that you aren't able to interact with the actual clients? That could be another one. These are things to consider when you're developing your project. And how are these constraints helpful? So thinking about it in a inverted way, how are these constraints actually helpful? How is maybe a short timeline helpful for you? How is maybe not having access to the clients helpful or beneficial to you? So consider that as well when you're thinking about constraints. Constraints don't have to always be negative. They can also bring out some positive there. Some last thoughts. So I really want you to think about this analysis more as a deep reflection of the research that you've gathered on your community partner, the project itself, and any other meetings or discussions you've had with your partner or even with me. Some things that you can do for your essay is have some section headers. So you can have one section as the rhetor, one section as the audience, one section as the introduction, and so on and so on. So that way it'll help me as the reader clearly read it. But that doesn't mean that your essay will be choppy. I do not expect your analysis to be choppy. So please have topic sentences as well as transitional sentences. That's going to help me as the reader to know how you flow as a writer. So just because your paper will be sectioned off doesn't mean that it can't flow. Try to stick to one idea per paragraph. So if you want to talk about audience invoked in one paragraph, that's great. However, don't include audience addressed in that same paragraph. Start another paragraph, which goes on to the next point. You can have multiple paragraphs under each section. I encourage you to not have long page length paragraphs. I honestly am looking for around 6 to 8 sentence paragraphs. Probably around, that would probably be a good medium. Have a works cited and in-text citation. If you're taking from the community partner's website, any meetings or conversations you've had with the community partner, any other documents or readings from this class. I don't expect you to have secondary sources outside the community partner or this class. Anything outside of that, I don't see you using. This is all really just an analysis of the information and materials you have available to you. So that's it for this part 1 of constructing a rhetorical argument. Let me know if you have any questions.